If I had known about the developmental disorder, I wouldn't have had you. You are an unnecessary existence for our family." When my mother said this to me, my world turned completely dark. Let's go. From now on, a new life begins for the three of us. My father stuck his head out of the car window and declared that loudly. In front of our grandparents' empty house, my parents left me behind, laughing as they left. As I watched the car drive away, all I could do was stand there, frozen, at the age of 10. My name is Tracy. I am turning 25. I have a twin brother, Tony, and I used to live with him and our parents, but we have been living separately for over 10 years. The reason is because of such a past. My father was a regular employee, and my mother worked part-time while being a housewife. It was an ordinary family found anywhere. However, a significant change occurred when we were in elementary school. Once school studies began, my brother's talents became prominent, and he was always expected to score perfectly on tests. "Tony is wonderful. You got a perfect score again. You are talented and will surely become someone great in the future," my mother would say with a smile, and my father would laugh loudly. Exactly. He might become a scholar, a doctor, or maybe an athlete. At least he won't have to worry about money. Meanwhile, far from scoring perfectly, I was distracted by the sounds of classmates moving their chairs or using mechanical pencils, and I couldn't concentrate in class, leading to regular scolding from teachers. From an early age, while I was often scolded, my parents gradually started to dote on my brother more. Meals were always what my brother liked, and only he was taken out for outings and fun, and whenever he wanted something, he could have anything he wished for. In contrast, I was often neglected. If at that time I had talked to teachers or other adults about how my parents treated me, perhaps something might have changed, but I couldn't say anything. I struggled with speaking and expressing my own emotions. I cannot organize my words well, and they scatter. Now that I am an adult, I can somehow communicate my thoughts, but I am still sometimes misunderstood. Even when I think I am responding appropriately without understanding the other person's intent, I sometimes give irrelevant responses. According to my mother, I was born with a mild developmental disorder, and although I have gradually been able to do more as an adult, I still have many difficulties, and as a child, I was difficult for adults to handle. However, that is no reason to neglect me, and I continue to grow. My parents, who thought of me as a naive child, often looked down on me and insulted me compared to my talented brother. Now, I could argue against such an attitude from my parents, but at the time, my parents held absolute authority, and I simply smiled and endured without rebelling against any words or actions. The relationship with my brother, who was close to me during my childhood, also began to change. As he grew older, my excellent brother did not try to understand me and started to look at me strangely. "Don't talk to me at school. It's good our faces are different. I wouldn't want anyone to think we're siblings. Keep quiet, because you're stupid." Before I knew it, the kind words from my brother disappeared, and he despised me as if I were disgusting, and eventually completely ignored me. Naturally, my parents did not pay attention to how he was to me. I simply no longer received attention or affection from my parents, and my days were reduced to receiving minimal care. On special days like birthdays or Christmas, my parents would take my brother out to eat. For me, there were no special cakes, treats, or gifts, just a supermarket ready-made meal with a discount sticker, and I was left alone to house sit. Even during New Year's celebrations, it was the same for me. "You stay in your room because I can't concentrate with you around." This is what my father told me, and my New Year's celebration was me eating snacks alone in my room, straining to hear the happy voices from the living room. "You don't need study materials, do you, since you can't do anything?" My parents said so matter-of-factly, and only my brother was given a desk and educational materials. I completely lost my motivation to study, and my grades continued to decline. I felt I had no place at school or at home, but there were two adults I truly trusted. They were my grandparents who lived far away. It took over 2 hours by car to visit them, and although we couldn't see them often, I was allowed to accompany my family to visit them twice a year, during summer and end-of-year holidays, under the condition that I wouldn't speak a word. My grandparents' house was in a nature-rich countryside, which might have seemed boring to my brother and parents, but for me it was a wonderful place. I was fascinated by the beautiful colors and landscapes created by nature, and while my brother was busy studying, I would play with the colored pencils I brought, coloring on the back of flyers to match the scenery. My parents and brother looked at me with scorn, but my grandparents would hang my drawings on the refrigerator saying, "It's a beautiful drawing of the sunset." I felt an unprecedented joy. Not just because they hung up my scribbles, but because they understood what I wanted to express without words. Certainly my grandparents loved my brother and didn't treat me specially, but they were the only ones who loved us twins equally. Therefore, the days I could see my grandparents twice a year were my emotional support. Then, when we were 10 years old, on a still chilly day in March, just as spring break had begun, my parents suddenly announced, "We've sold our apartment." What? Confused by what they meant, my brother snorted with laughter. "You're really stupid. It's been sold. A new life awaits us in a new house." Moving? If the house is sold, where would we live? What about school? When is the move? Why? Overwhelmed by the sudden news, my father yelled angrily at me, "Shut up. Your talk is always pointless. It's because you didn't notice, even though we've been preparing for a long time. Pack your stuff quickly." I hadn't realized until then, but the living room was already packed up. Because I was mostly confined to my room, I hadn't noticed that things around the house had gradually been disappearing. While panicking, I held back tears and packed my belongings into cardboard boxes. However, I could only take a few toys and only the bare minimum amount of clothes. Since it was spring break, my belongings were most of what I brought home from school, and I finished packing them into boxes quickly. "I'm ready. Everything's packed in boxes. I've got my school bag too, but anything else?" "We don't need your report. Just get in the car quickly." "Okay, I understand." My father tossed my cardboard box into the trunk of the car roughly, and I got in the car holding my school bag. However, Tony, who usually sat next to me, was not there. Tony isn't here. Where is Tony? It can't be just us three going, right? Aren't we missing some luggage? "Aren't you supposed to be quiet in the car?" My mother scolded me sharply, and I fell silent. "It's hard to understand you. We gave your brother some pocket money and let him go out to play. Be quiet if you understand." In the silence, I absent-mindedly gazed at the blossoming trees outside the car, but suddenly a light of hope flickered in my heart. Maybe, just as they used to take only my brother out, this time they were taking only me to some fun place. My parents were perhaps trying to surprise me with the move. While I unconsciously smiled, my parents were quietly talking about something. At that time, I was too excited to care about what was being said. However, I never dreamed that this joy would later be betrayed. I eventually fell asleep and was suddenly woken up by my mother's loud voice. "Wake up quickly. Take your school bag and get out of the car." Not knowing where I was, I got out of the car and was astonished by the scene in front of me. It was in front of my beloved grandparents' house. Yay. Grandma, Grandpa. I energetically tried to open the door, but suddenly stood frozen. The door wouldn't open. It was locked. "Mom, I can't get in." "Is that so?" "It's a weekday today, so they're probably still at work." "What?" "But I just called them, so they'll be back soon." "See you?" My father roughly placed my luggage in front of the entrance and immediately returned to the car. Feeling anxious, I hastily grabbed my mother's hand. "Wait. Where are you going?" "Mom, Dad, wait." "Where? We're going back. We can't leave your brother alone, can we?" "What?" My mother shook off my hand as if it were obvious and stated, Your brother got into a famous private elementary school that ensures progression through grades. He's already decided to transfer there starting next term. We sold the apartment as part of the tuition, and we're moving to a new house for him. But having you around distracts him and also adds extra food costs. With the new term starting, this is your chance to stay here. Wait, what's happening? Am I changing schools? Am I going to a different school? That's exactly what annoys me. When my mother raised her voice in anger, I was at a loss for words. You've always been a burden to me since you were little. Your grades are poor and your appearance is below average. You can't even hold a proper conversation. Your brother is such a good child. Why do you always cause problems? Did I do something bad? If so, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I don't need apologies that are just lip service. If I had known about your developmental disorder, I wouldn't have had you. You are an unnecessary existence for our family. When my mother said this to me, my world turned completely dark. Let's go. From now on, a new life begins for the three of us. My father stuck his head out of the car window and declared that loudly. I must somehow stop my parents. Don't go. Don't leave me behind. Dad, Mom, am I really a bad child? Words swirl in my mind, and when I try to speak, the right words just don't come out easily. As I desperately tried to move my mouth, my mother just glanced at me and got into the car. Sorry for the wait. Since we've come all this way, let's buy a famous cake from around here and eat it with Tony. All I could do was blankly watch as my parents left me behind. Tracy. Are you okay, Tracy? Grandpa. What I saw through my blurred vision were the faces of my grandparents looking at me with concern. By the time I realized, it had already gotten dark. While waiting for my grandparents to return, it seems I had fallen asleep without noticing. Your hands are cold, and your face is pale. My grandfather wrapped me in a jumper, carried me on his back, and took me to a warm room. My grandparents were moving quickly and talking in very angry tones. How long has Tracy been waiting there? They couldn't believe seeing a message when they happened to look at their phone at work. We've left Tracy in front of the house. Please take care of Tracy. They both rushed back home immediately. It would have been a disaster if they hadn't found me. At that time, my grandfather was working as a craftsman, and my grandmother was diligently working at a local restaurant. Despite knowing their busy lives, my parents didn't contact them in advance, only sent a message on that day, and the communication ended just like that. That made me painfully aware of how insignificant I was to my parents. As I took a sip of the hot milk my grandmother gave me, its warmth relaxed my feelings, and I couldn't stop my tears. My grandmother gently stroked my back and comforted me as I cried. Meanwhile, my grandfather suddenly stood up and called my father, but the discussion escalated, and he eventually ended the call by slamming down the receiver. Tracy, I talked to your dad, but it seems we can't communicate properly. Can you tell me what happened? Through tears, I explained the events that had led up to this moment. My story was more disorganized than usual, but my grandparents just quietly listened. They said I'm an unnecessary existence because I have a developmental disorder. That it would have been better if I hadn't been born. Mom and Dad are going to create a new family with Tony. As I choked out the words, I was enveloped in a warm embrace. My grandmother hugged me tightly. What are you talking about? You are a wonderful child. No matter what anyone says, you are irreplaceable to us. I am truly happy that you were born. Yet, people's worth isn't determined by their intelligence or appearance. Your grandfather and I are just ordinary elderly people who didn't attend prestigious schools, but we've lived our lives utilizing what we're good at. You might not be good at academics, but you have a talent for sensitivity and expression. That's an irreplaceable talent that is uniquely yours. Talent. Yes, there are no adults here to make you sad anymore, so you don't have to worry. I'm sorry for not noticing it until now. You've been doing your best. As my grandfather said this and stroked my head in apology, I was overwhelmed with emotion and burst into tears. My grandparents held me tight until my tears stopped. After that, I began living with my grandparents. They enrolled me in a small local elementary school, where the teachers were very understanding. One of them was the first person, besides my grandparents, who really understood me. Because it's a rural area with few students, they implemented an educational program tailored to individual needs, which took my characteristics into account and helped progress my lessons. Thanks to that, my grades, which had previously been poor, started to improve significantly. Even though I struggled with communication, I came to accept my unique traits and eventually made friends. I began to live a relaxed life, both mentally and physically, and found what I truly wanted to do. And 15 years have passed. During that time, I never heard from my parents or brother, and before I knew it, their addresses and phone numbers had all changed. Just as my parents' and brothers' faces were fading from my memory, that day suddenly arrived. Open the door. You're in there, aren't you? The sound of someone banging on the door violently shattered the early morning's calm. My grandparents were already awake, and I, still groggy, headed to the entrance. After leaving your own daughter for over a decade, what do you want now? Startled by my grandfather's angry voice, I stepped outside and widened my eyes. Well, if it isn't Tracy, you've grown so much. The mother I remembered was always well kept. But the woman in front of me looked worn out and tired. The man next to her had a belly, a far cry from my father's previously slim figure. Smiling amiably, the two of them reached out their hands in a friendly manner. I avoided their hands and glared at them. If you are my parents, why have you come? Don't talk like we're strangers. We came to talk. Talk. Yes, we are fully aware. It seems this workshop is making quite a profit now. Dad has gotten old, and as both a manager and a craftsman, he's reaching his limits, right? That's why we've come back. I thought I'd take over the business. And we heard our lovely daughter is set to inherit from him. That should be ours to receive. My grandfather snorted at my father and mother's words. Oh? You came back to get a share of the leftovers? And even take over the business? How presumptuous. An amateur with no basic knowledge of glass artistry taking over our workshop. We've already decided our successor. What? Tracy. She will take over. She's a genius. What? Ridiculous. This child who can't do anything. What? As if to interrupt my father, my grandmother threw a newspaper at his face. What are you doing? Look inside, you fool. There's an article about this workshop. My father flipped through the newspaper, his eyes widening as he alternated between looking at me and the newspaper in shock. Young glass artisan, from a local workshop to the world. It was an article from a recent interview. By the time I was a middle school student, I had become fascinated by my grandfather's work. I had started helping out in the workshop around that time. I was initially just an assistant, but as I started to actively engage in glass artistry, I quickly became an apprentice in my grandfather's workshop. Recognized for my skills by my grandfather, I became passionate about capturing the allure of nature in glass. A few years ago, I finally completed the piece I had dreamed of making and started selling it. It became popular on social media, and I quickly gained recognition, becoming known as a prominent glass artisan. Now, I even receive orders from restaurants and stores abroad, and we've expanded our workshop with more artisans and launched online sales. You are indeed our daughter, not like that useless, timid son. As my father exaggeratedly praised me, my mother eagerly nodded along. Useless? Timid? Surprised by the words so opposite from my memory of my brother, I asked them, and my mother glared at me sharply. Just listen. That useless Tony. My mother began speaking excitedly. According to her, my brother had graduated from university and landed a job at a top company, all going well initially. However, being praised as excellent for years, he became arrogant and unexpectedly fragile. Buffeted by the harsh waves of society, he faced failure within a short time and quit his job less than a year after starting. Can you believe it? Just a little scolding and he quit his job. I could never imagine it. Now he mostly stays in his room, hardly ever coming out except for the bathroom or shower. We quit our jobs because Tony had started working. Hey Dad, setting aside the inheritance issue, you have money, right? Can't you take care of us three? Or even just us two? At my father's words, my grandfather's expression turned to astonishment. Do you two only care about yourselves? He's still young, he'll figure something out. If it's decided that we stay here, he'll manage somehow. He's not a child anymore. It's impossible for us to find new jobs at our age. Hey Dad, listen to your loving son's request. My grandfather, dumbfounded, sighed and went back into the room. As I stood there stunned, my mother looked at me intently and said, "You should live with your mom and dad too, right?" Oh, I forgot. You don't understand what we're talking about anyway, do you? All you need to do is nod along. While saying this, my mother had bloodshot eyes, and my father nodded in agreement. After thinking for a moment, I responded, "Why do I have to live with strangers?" What? We are your real parents. We raised you. When I lived with my parents as a child, I never felt like I was being cared for. I barely existed. It was my grandparents and my teachers who truly raised me. I continued speaking to the two of them who were frozen in shock. You may be my parents by law, but I have no memory of that. I can't live with strangers. I looked at them completely as strangers. If I was wrong, my grandparents would correct me. Their silence probably meant it was okay. As my grandfather watched with a smile, my father looked at him. "Don't you think that's a terrible thing to say?" "Dad, say something." "Indeed. If you want me to, I'll say something too. It's strange to say you raised Tracy when you abandoned her at 10. No, not about me. Say something to Tracy. Tracy, say something to your grandfather. Something." "No, that's not it. You told me to say something. So I said something." As my father began to flush with frustration, my grandfather started laughing with a chuckle. "Don't abandon us." "Hey, Dad." As my father pleaded, my grandfather waved his hand away and shouted in a low voice, "Enough already. Why would you say such spoiled things now?" At my grandfather's stern voice, my father and mother froze in place. During this pause, my grandmother hurried to the kitchen. When she returned, she had a large bag in her hand. "This is perfect. Now, get out, you bad luck," she said as she threw salt at my mother's face. Ouch. What is this? Salt. The bag my grandmother held contained salt used for cooking. Parents who abandon their children are the epitome of bad luck, my grandmother said calmly as she continued to throw salt at my parents' faces. "Go back already. I'll keep throwing salt until you leave." "We have plenty of salt, so be prepared," my grandmother declared. Next to her, my grandfather stood holding a new bag. "Leave," he shouted as he forcefully threw salt. The salt flew with force, hitting my parents in the face directly. "Hey, Dad." "Mom, stop. Please. Stop it already," my parents cried out. However, my grandparents continued to throw salt emotionlessly, shouting, "Go back already." "Never come back," they yelled as my parents desperately clung to my hand. "Are you going to abandon your own parents? We're drowning in debt and struggling to live. Shouldn't family help us out?" they said. "My family is only my grandparents," I responded. I forcefully shook off their wrinkled hands. As my parents crumbled beside me, I took the bag from my grandmother and declared, "This is goodbye forever." Saying this, I emptied the contents of the bag over my parents. That moment was decisive, and my parents, disheartened, fled as if running away. As time passed, my brother appeared at our workshop. The debt collectors chasing my parents had left my brother behind when they fled the house at night. Soon the debt collectors came, evicted my brother, and he was left distraught. The police took him in, and as the only relatives, they contacted my grandparents. One who does not work does not eat. If you work hard and help out in the workshop, we'll provide a place to live and meals. What do you say? My grandfather proposed. Surprisingly, my brother agreed immediately. His work in the workshop was still unpolished, and he was often scolded by my grandfather and other staff, but once he started showing talent in online sales and accounting, he became indispensable to the workshop. My brother, who has grown up, is ashamed of his past actions and now acknowledges and supports my abilities. It's still too early to say we've reconciled, but I find it both delightful and embarrassing that he is now treating me kindly again. Interestingly, just when my brother was getting accustomed to the workshop's work and starting to be acknowledged by everyone, it seems our parents suddenly contacted him. "Tony, where are you and what are you doing? It's getting dangerous here. At worst, we might end up on a fishing boat. Please help us." Ignoring any mention of my brother's well-being after they left him behind, and focusing only on themselves, my brother completely lost his patience. Then he changed all his phone numbers and email addresses, cutting off any means of contact from our parents. I wonder if those two are working on the sea now. As a result, both my brother and I truly feel relieved to have escaped from those parents. The dinner table surrounded by my grandparents, my brother, and me might not have special dishes, but it feels warm and comforting. In a slightly misshapen dish made by my brother, there is mashed potatoes cooked by my grandmother. My grandfather is enjoying his beer in a glass that I made. I am finally feeling